Okay, let's create our first swatch. The first things first that we have to do in whichever slicer you're using is to choose the printer we are printing on, and I'm gonna choose to print on, let's say, MK3S Prusa printer. Okay, now I'm gonna choose the filament, and the filament that I want to use is the generic flex. So I have to check for the generic flex. If I don't have it there, then I have to add it inside. And let me click on add. If I cannot find that, click on filaments, flex, all of them. And the generic flex is here. Finish. Now let me, oh, here, generic flex. Now I have generic flex, and then I have to choose the print settings. The print settings will be specifying how quick the printer is going to move, like predefining if you don't want to, but we are going to adjust it anyway. But we are going to set the height of the layer. So how many layers do we want to slice our piece in? And it's always a good practice to slice your piece at least for 3 layers, because the more layers you use, the more chances you have to cover some small potential mistakes. And also the more layers you use, the more resistant and durable is the fabric. So if we have a 0.4 millimeters fabric, we want to add at least 3 layers. To make it easy for you, I'm gonna say that we are going to start printing with the first layer to be 0.2. We are aiming to be able to print for 0.1, but different printers allow different settings. And for example, on Prusa printer, I was able to print with very detailed using 0.1, but with my Bamboo AI Mini, I wasn't able to print with detail. I could go only to quality. So depending on your printer, you can also try to make the layers thinner and thinner, because the thinner you make them, the better are the results. But it depends what your printer allows you to do. So we are going to click here on 0.2, but we are also going to adjust it. We are going to also change the mode we are in, because I already had my Prusa slicer downloaded before. So I'm going to change it from beginner mode, which hides a lot of things that are very useful, to expert mode. So if you're not having the same view as I am, check if you're having the beginner, normal or expert mode, and we're going to click on the expert mode. Wonderful. So now we have the printer, the filament is the generic one, and the print settings. We want to load our STL file, the one that we created in Tinkercad. So we're going to click here on add, and we're going to navigate towards downloads and find out our swatch square 50x50 times 0.4. Either you can store it in the folder. I had it in downloads, since I like to organize it more in Tinkercad rather than in my computer, just in case I lose access to my computer, or I'm using a computer, for example, that is from work, and then I cannot work on it if I switch to my home computer or home notebook or laptop. So I'm gonna click here and select the swatch, and it's gonna be automatically loaded in the middle of the build plate, and you will see that we are going to have this beautiful swatch. So how do we make this swatch not the filled square, not the filled in box, but this beautiful textile-like fabric? For that, we have to set up 2 things. The first one is to remove the top and the bottom layer, because if you remove the coverage of the box that we have squished, the top layer and the bottom layer, then you have the walls, the perimeters, the walls that hold the structure together, and then you have the infill, the part that fills all of the 3D design and objects. So again, just to repeat, what is the infill? The infill is the object that fills in the inner part of the design that we want to 3D print. It's designed to create these different mathematical structures and different geometries that are more economic to print if we want, and different properties of the infill make the design either more sturdier or flexible or more rigid, depending on how thick and what is the design of the infill. Some infills are faster than others, and some are also easier to break. Some are less complicated. We're going to have this entire section to explore and do the research on the best infills that your 3D printer can print from. Also, if you're not using Prusa slicer, then the infill that I am going to have are also different on different slicers. So this is also one of the reasons why it's good to be able to switch from one slicer to another. If, for example, you have a different infill on other slicers that you would like to use, then you can hop to Cura and use the infills that are in Cura. But let's stop talking in theory. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to, for a second, adjust the height of our swatch, and I'm going to make it a real box. So I'm going to say that it's 50 millimeters. You don't have to do that. This is just to show you what is the infill. Okay, so I have this box. If I wanted to print it, I had to fill in the entire space and make it full, or to avoid the print to be hollow, then I would need to like print it one layer by layer and make it full. So it would take a lot of time and also a lot of material. In order to avoid it, printing uses these infills to fill the structures inside. If I slice it now, you can see that the cube actually has these structures inside, because now we are using the gyrate infill with the 50% infill. But what if I make the infill more loose? What if I make it, for example, 5%? So if I slice it now, you can see that the waves became much bigger. So you can see these gigantic waves creating these structures. But if I do, for example, 70%, then I have it very close to one another. I have to really zoom in. It almost looks like weave. And it's still the same infill. It just changes the structure and looks different depending on the density of the infill. So the density tells us how dense will be the structures, how near to each other, how collapsed they will be inside of the object or the design that we are printing. Let me show you a different infill. If I go to print settings and click on infill, then I can change the gyrate to, for example, rectilinear, which is the first basic infill structure that just looks like a mesh or net. So I'm going to slice it now, and if I leave it on 70, then you can see then we have this structure that almost looks like a weave pattern. So if we're moving here, then you can see that we have this very dense mesh, but if I click on 5% and slice it now, then we have very loose mesh, very loose net that's going to be built. The walls that are holding together the infill inside, the structures inside, are called perimeters. Depending on the structure and the infill that we are using and the project that we want to create at the end, we are going to either print with walls, with perimeters, or without the walls. The more perimeters and the more numbers you add into your structure, the thicker is going to be the part that holds the filament together, and the stronger will be the grab of the filament, but it also loses flexibility. So the more is the wall thicker, the less flexible is then the piece. So the most flexible piece are the ones that that have 2 perimeters, 1 perimeter, or 0, of course. But it's also a little, as it's more flexible, it's also a little bit more fragile. So the best setup is to have 2 walls or 3 walls on your swatch. Let me show you another infill. And this time I'm going to show you here on the menu, so you don't have to click on print settings, but we're going to click here on directly on our swatch. And we're going to say that we want to change the infill. Here we are going to click on infill, and we are going to have a menu that is going to let us, from the first panel, from the plater panel, change the fill density and the fill pattern. So we're going to choose a different pattern. I want to show you maybe concentric. That's one of the patterns. Let's give it a 20. If I slice it now, then you can see that we have these concentric cubes. And as you can see, this infill would not hold together if we print it without the bottom or the top. So there are closed infills that we can use. The closed infills are the infills that have the structure that can stand alone without the bottom part, the upper part of the swatch or of the design. Then we have these open infills that we cannot print just by themselves because they wouldn't hold together. Even though we cannot print them alone, we can use them to combine with other infills, because we can have we can combine infills as well, or we can use them to create beautiful structures on top of our 3D printed textile that is very, very dense. So we can leave the bottom layer. So just imagine if the purple part was, for example, a black filament, and then the red part would be, for example, a blue filament or a gray filament. Then if we print this swatch, we're going to have a nice swatch with a beautiful texture. It's going to be very dense and firm, but it's going to be a wonderful piece for it to create a jacket with, or trousers or shorts or a skirt. So we can use the open infills to create beautiful textures and structures on top of our 3D printed fashion. But let me get back to the basics. We are going to go through all of that in the future sections. Wonderful. So now what we want to do is to create our first swatch. So I'm going to click on the swatch again. I'm going to right click on the name of my file, and I'm gonna head to add settings. Add settings, and I'm gonna find layers and perimeters. So I'm gonna click on layers and perimeters. I want to choose bottom solid layer, top solid layer, and perimeters, and I believe that's it. So I will have all of these information set. And why did I need it to edit here? Well, what I want to change is to remove the top and the bottom layer. So I want to go to bottom solid layers and say that the bottom solid layer is going to be 0. I'm going to also say that I want the top solid layer to be 0. And the number of perimeters, the number of walls that we are going to create around, I'm going to leave it at, let's say 3. Let's make your print easy at the first one, very easy. So we're going to say that we want 3 perimeters. I'm going to slice it now. And you can see that was the thing that I was talking about, that the open infills would not hold together. If we've printed these, then we would have very nice squares, but it wouldn't be a solid fabric. So we have to also change the texture, the pattern. I'm going to change it to rectilinear. I'm going to slice it again. And this, if I have a look at the pattern and at the parts on how it looks like, so I have to adjust the density because this is too loose. For different purposes and for different projects, you can adjust your fill density according to what are your needs. If you want to create something resembling like real mesh with a lot of holes, then you can make it a little bit looser. Or if you want it to look as much as fabric, then you can make it a little bit more dense. So let's try 40. Usually between 30 and 40 for rectilinear works well, but you will have a chance to explore the best setups for your 3D printer. Perfect. Now that we have it, then I have to go back to adjusting my object, the dimensions. So I'm going to change the dimensions back to 0.4, and I'm going to slice it again. And this is going to be our swatch. So if I go through it, we have now only 1 layer, and we are going to change that, don't worry. So we have one basic layer, the first one, the base layer, and then we have the second layer. So if I move back to show you correctly, this is the first layer that's going to be printed, and this is the second layer that we are going to print. Now, what we want to adjust now is to change the number of layers. As I said before, it's very important to make sure that we have at least 3 layers. So I'm going to go to print settings, and I'm going to go to layers and perimeters. I'm going to leave the first layer to be 0.2 because usually we want to lay a very solid first layer. So our print, when taken off the build plate looks perfect, looks very nice. And then when we have a solid first layer, then we can make thinner other layers. In total, our height of our swatch is 0.4. The first layer is 0.2. That leaves us with 0.2 millimeters to cut in half in order to have 3 layers. We are going to say that the first layer that we want to be printed is going to be 0.2, and then the other layer is going to be 0.1. I'm going to go back to the plater and slice it now. And you can see that we are going to have one stop during, if we do the virtual printing, we have the first layer that's going to be printed for 0.2. Then from 0.2 we have the second layer, and from 0.3 to 0.4 we have the third layer. So we have 3 layers on our swatch. Wonderful. Now that we have our swatch prepared, we have to tell our 3D printer the settings in order to create the best piece with our filament. Let's head to the next chapter and explore what are the best settings to use with different types of filament.